everybody. By my clock, it's time for us to pick up with session number 4. Now, anybody who knows me, anybody who's seen me present before probably knows that this next session is kind of near and dear to my heart. I'm kind of the in-house CSS junkie. And you may have heard me say this before, but I meet hundreds and hundreds of Flare users every year. And one of the things that I've found is that the real major difference between the average Flare user and the power kind of guru level Flare user isn't that one knows Flare better than the other. I mean, there are only so many buttons you can push in the Flare interface. The big difference is that the power user has learned how to harness the cascading style sheet language and use it to propel Flare to a whole new level. So from my perspective, the more you can work with cascading style sheets, that's just the secret sauce to really unlocking the power of Flare. So with that background, I'm going to do kind of like I did with the last session. We're going to start real basic for the absolute beginners, but then we're going to kind of fall off the cliff and go real advanced for the last bit. So for you beginners, you've probably heard of CSS or cascading style sheets. You've probably heard people talk about it, but you've never really looked into it. So what on earth is this thing that people keep talking about? Well, it's a standards-based method for controlling the look and feel of content. And what I think is important there is it's standards-based. It isn't owned by any one company. So it's not like a proprietary thing that you're locked in. Anything you learn about CSS should just make you better no matter what HTML or XML-based tool set you ever use in the future. So it's one of those cool things that you can learn and not worry about it, being obsolete because you move to a new company next year. Now, the way CSS works, this is a bit different than a word processor. In a word processor, you style text. In CSS, you don't. You style elements. Now, what's the big difference? What am I talking about here? Well, I apologize. I am not an artist, but I'm going to subject you to my complete lack of artistic skill here. If I have some text, well, in an XML/HTML world, that text is going to start behind the scenes, angle bracket, P, angle bracket, and then at the end, there's going to be angle bracket, a slash, and then a P, and then an angle bracket. What we style is not the actual text. Our styles are going to hang on that opening element. And it might seem like a subtle distinction, but it makes it very different than a word processor. If I don't have angle brackets, I can't style it. So there's all kinds of different ways of adding additional elements just for styling, span elements, div elements, but that's kind of a key fundamental thing to understand. All right, so we'll erase my horrible artwork here. But the whole goal of CSS is to completely separate formatting from the content. And what do I mean by that? In a perfect world, If you remove the style sheet from your topic, then your topic should look like Notepad. If your topic still looks good after you've removed the style sheet, that is a bad sign, because your topic should just look like it's all text, all Times New Roman, the moment you remove this. We want all formatting to be in that external document. So what can CSS do? This is the part that tends to surprise people. Well, it can do text formatting. Obviously, that is the one that everybody thinks of. We can make text a different size. We can make text a different color, a different font. But we can also do element sizing. In one of the earlier sessions that Jennifer gave, one of the questions was, about sizing images. Well, that can be critical, especially if you're doing that multi-channel publishing. In the old days, we would explicitly size the image. But in a multi-channel environment, it's much better to have an image and you name it. What type of image is that? Oh, that's a screenshot. Then in the style sheet, we might say, oh, well, screenshots are 90% of the available width. And now I have a screenshot that will automatically resize itself, whether it's on a desktop or a tablet, or if it's going to a PDF. So even element sizing, the more we can get that off the images themselves and put it in the style sheet and make those relative values, the more success we can have in that multi-channel type publishing. And that goes for tables, that goes for a lot of things, not just images. You can do element positioning. I've had a lot of people, look at some of my demo files, and a lot of times I'll have a little, nav box just floating in the top right corner of a topic, and it has 2 toggler links in it or something. Oh my gosh, how'd you do that? Oh, it's simple. I just went into the element positioning in the CSS, and I set it to a value of float right. Boom, my little nav panel's in the top right corner now. So we can position elements wherever we want on screen using CSS. Now, a lot of people, this is probably one of the things they know about, but you can change link attributes. I can have a link, in your normal hyperlink, it's typically blue. And then once you've clicked on it, it turns red. And then if you come back to that page later, it's purple to show, hey, you've already followed this link. But you can actually change those link values to be anything that you want. I've seen some customers, to great effect, they have said, okay, we want all of our hyperlinks and our cross-reference links to open up a new browser window to be your regular blue color. But anything that opens up a pop-up window, we want those to be an olive color. And then, any links that launch a PDF, we want those to be, violet in color. And so now we've created this color code. So once a customer has used our docs a few times, they know, hey, if I click on a link that's this color, I'm going to get this behavior. So even your link attributes can be controlled. And I'm not sure why you would want to do this, but you can even manipulate the cursor. If you just want to mess with people, you can set it up so if they hover over your image, the cursor changes from an arrow to the spinning hourglass or the busy signal. Again, I don't know why you'd want to do that other than to, maybe if it's April 1st or something, but you could. So there's just so much that you can do with CSS that people don't realize. And to try and kind of drive this home, there's an amazing example website out there. And I realize you guys can't click the link on screen right now, but I'm going to demonstrate. There is this site. It's just www.csszengarden.com. And I'm actually going to launch this. And if you open the Zen Garden, And of course, I've got the GoToMeeting interface obfuscating my ability to get to some of my browser. So let me move a few things here real quick. There we go. There it is. So here is the Zen Garden website. And it's nothing crazy fancy, but it's pretty cool looking. I mean, on the left-hand side, you've got some text. Way up at the top, you've got your heading 1, your main title of the page. Behind the heading 1, there's this kind of greeny, bluey, fuzzy background image. There's this navigation panel on the right with a gray background. And if we scroll down, heading 2, content, heading 2, content, yada, yada. It's pretty standard looking. Well, what if we take away the style sheet? I'm going to open this in a new tab, but without the style sheet. And you look at that and you say, oh man, that looks just like my Flare topics. Exactly. The only thing missing is the CSS. That's the key. Going from something that looks like this to something that looks like this is just learning a little bit about the CSS language. Now, to drive that home even further, remember earlier I said you can use CSS to do positioning. Well, in this pretty version, look at all these cool links over here on the right. But what if we go the version with no CSS? Well, I don't see any links over on the right. But what happens if I scroll down and I scroll, ooh, way down at the bottom of the page, there's a bunch of links. Well, what you can't see here is there's an invisible box around these links. It's something called a div element. And in this case, they've named that div element, that invisible box, navigation. So all they do is they go into the style sheet and they say, okay, navigation. Anything that says navigation, I want a gray background and I want it docked to the right-hand side. Burp. That's what happens. So that's why I really encourage people to learn as much about CSS as possible. And to help drive that home, what if marketing wants to do a complete redesign of this look and feel? Well, if it's set up correctly, you never touch a single topic. All I'm going to do here is I'm going to take away this current style sheet and I'm going to replace it with another style sheet over here on the right named Mid-Century Modern. Boop. Boy, doesn't that look different? Well, it's the same page. What happened to that nice big heading 1 at the top? Well, now it's tiny. It's over on the left and it's been rotated 90 degrees. It's vertical. The heading 2 is now kind of the main eye catcher. And if I scroll down, well, here's my body text. Now vertically, here's my next heading 2, and here's my body. But it's the same page. It's just a different style sheet rendering it differently. Here's our links down at the bottom. Now I'm going to show one more, just because this one's a little bit silly, a robot named Jimmy. Now I don't know if this is going to come through the web interface of GoTo as well as it shows up locally for me, but there's actually a rotating starburst behind my buddy Jimmy here. And that rotating starburst is not any kind of fancy video. It's not Flash. It's just style sheets. There is literally a style sheet causing this page to animate. And I realize that animation is kind of herky-jerky in the web meeting. I think the web meeting only updates once every 5 seconds or so. But hopefully you can also see that one thing you can do with CSS is something called Z-order. You can make certain things in front of other things, and you can even control transparency. So as I start to scroll up, notice my buddy Jimmy does not move, but the page starts to scroll over him. But it's very subtly semi-transparent. I can still see Jimmy behind the page, at least in the white background. But then I get to the blue area and it's completely opaque. And then I get back to white and I can just see my little buddy Jimmy in there again. And again, this is all done using a cascading style sheet that is applied to a topic that looks like this. So that's the power of CSS. All right, so after this 1 hour session, you're all going to be able to do that, right? You're not even close, but we're going to get you pointed in the right direction. Now, some fundamentals, and this is where I think a lot of people go wrong. They think I was an expert in styling Word documents. I'll be able to leverage that knowledge and just style HTML pages. Bad answer. There are too many just fundamental differences in the Microsoft Word style language versus the cascading style sheet style language. And one of the first ones that trips people up is this concept of inheritance. Now, I've tried to create kind of a graphical representation of a very tiny little fake topic. And again, I'll use my crummy lack of art skills here. But most pages have two major sections. There's the head area and there's the body area. Basically, body is what you can see in the browser. The head area, that's things like the topic title, links to the stuff. It's stuff you don't see unless you pop into a code view and you actually look at the back end of your topic. But if we look inside that body area, there are three smaller boxes: heading 1, paragraph, and paragraph. Since those three are inside of body, they are considered to be children of body. The reason that's important, the way style inheritance works in CSS, it's based entirely on these parent-child relationships. It's not like Word. In Word or a word processor, you could create style X and you could just mandate, I want style X based on style Y right over there. And it would inherit all the style Y properties and then any new properties that you apply. We can't do that in CSS. In CSS, this heading 1 and these 2 paragraphs are going to inherit any styling rules that are applied to its parent body, whether I like it or not. It just happens. So that's the inheritance model that you have to become comfortable with. And I will admit, I was one of those Microsoft Word style gurus, and I fought and I fought and I fought. I was going to make CSS work like Word, and it just resulted in lots of nights of, tearing my hair out and crying in my pillow. But the moment I got on board and I really started learning this inheritance model, it's like the light bulb went off. I can get the same look and feel, and I can write about 1/3 as many styles as I did in Microsoft Word. How is that? Well, if I want 90% of my text to be, Verdana and 12 point and black, and I want my paragraphs to have that look. I want my list items to have that look. I want content in my table cells. I want everything to be 12 point, Verdana, and black. Well, instead of setting each individual style, I just set all of that on the body style and I let it inherit. In fact, I don't think they're still using this, but this actually used to be an interview question. If somebody wanted to try and get a job at MadCap Software as a technical writer, well, the lead technical writer doing the interview would walk up to the whiteboard and they would write something like this on the whiteboard: body, H1 sample heading, paragraph, sample text. And they would hand the candidate a marker and say, okay, go to the whiteboard, and your syntax does not have to be perfect, but how would you style this so that all content on the whole page was in Arial? And it's so disappointing because almost every candidate will go in there and they'll create an H1 style and make it Arial. And then they create a paragraph style and they make it Arial. And they just failed that question. If somebody understands inheritance and your task is to make everything on that page Arial, then you should write one style: body, font family, Arial. The heading one will inherit that. The paragraph will inherit that automatically. So that's why understanding inheritance is so critical. And trust me, I'm just touching. I could do 20, 30 minutes on each of these subjects. I'm really trying to just plant some seeds here because we've got to keep moving. So then we get to font sizing. And this really messes with people because everybody thinks, well, you just use point sizes, right? Wrong. Unfortunately, there are two different ways to size text: fixed font sizing and relative font sizing. I'm going to do the quick, short version here. Fixed sizes are anything you could go down to the stationery store and actually buy a rule in those units. Points, picas, inches, centimeters, those are all fixed sizes. Those are great in print, horrible in a web browser. And without going into all the details, just to drop a nugget, the reason they're horrible online, well, it's really twofold. And I think the one on the slide here is the minor of the two. As long as you're using point sizes in a web browser, once you get the content looking good on a Windows machine, you need a magnifying glass to read it on a Mac. If you get it looking good on a Mac, well, then you switch over to a Windows machine and it's all blown up and cartoon looking. And that's just because the internal size values are different in those two operating systems. Now, the one that I think is even more important is using point sizes online or fixed sizes online can also cause you to fail an accessibility audit. So if your content needs to be accessible to people with disabilities, people who are visually impaired, then you can't use fixed sizes as well. So fixed are great for going to PDF. So that brings us to relative sizes. Relative sizes are things like percentages or M units, and they're the exact opposite. These are wonderful in a web browser. Your content will display identically on a Windows machine, a Macintosh machine, a Unix machine. It'll be identical across different browser types, but it's going to be horrible going to a printer. So there's really two separate sizes, and they have special use cases. So as a rule, in your print outputs, always use fixed sizes, and in your browser outputs, always use relative sizes. Now, also, I want to point out, because I had somebody send me a nasty email after a session one time, I'm talking about text sizing. when it comes to line widths, when it comes to, white space, go crazy. Use points, use pixels, use whatever you want. That's fine. But specifically when sizing text, use points for your print outputs. For your browser, use percentages or M units. All right, so that's going to break that. Well, and let me back up. How can you do that? Again, we don't have a lot of time here, but that's where mediums come in the Flare CSS editor. If I bring up the Flare editor real quick, in this case, I happen to be in the advanced mode of the editor. I've chosen my heading 1, but noticed that right now, my font size under default medium is 1.7 M units. It's actually a font family. It's a collection of font types, and it's blue color. But that very same heading 1 under medium print, it's a fixed size, 12 point. It's a black color, and it's a very specific font, Times New Roman. Both of these mediums are written to the same style sheet. So if you're not currently setting up mediums in your style sheet, then that would be a place to do some study. We're not going to have a lot of time to go deep into that here because, oh man, the clock is running out fast. But it's and you aren't limited to 2. Maybe I want one look on a desktop, but then I'm worried that I'm using a lot of white space above my heading 1, and I want to trim that down if they're on a tablet or a smartphone. Well, I can go to my medium dropdown, and I can add a tablet medium. And now I can render text 3 different ways. So now you can see that on a desktop, my heading 1 will be 1.7 M units. On a tablet, my heading 1 is going to be a little bit smaller, but still the same values as far as color and font. But in print, it will be 12 point. So depending on how advanced you need to be, you can have as many different mediums as you need. All right, but that's getting a little bit deep there. Let's go ahead and go back. One of the last things I want to talk about as far as theory goes, and this is the one that really drives people nuts, is the box model. Now, when you first load a page, like you see on the right, as humans, we see a heading 1 and 2 paragraphs. That is not what the browser sees, and that is not what Flare sees. It's unfair, but the computers, they also see these invisible boxes around the header and around the paragraphs. Now, why do we care about an invisible box if we can't see it? Because that is how white space is controlled. If you want to change the margin or the indent values on something on screen, you don't get to do that with one value. You have to manage 3 separate values. And until you understand that, trying to adjust white space will cause you to scream at some point. So what happens is all of our values reference that invisible box. So the invisible box itself has a width, and that is a value known as border. The edge of the available area, and I say that because if it's a web browser, that would be the edge of the browser window, but if it's a PDF, it would be my margin. So from the edge of the available area to the invisible box that you can't see, that's your margin value. Then the invisible box has a width of border, And then we have the green value, which is padding. And people say, well, wait a minute, padding, that's just in tables. In a word processor, it's just in tables. In a CSS world, everything has padding. Now, where this really trips people up is in a horizontal direction, these three values are always additive. Where you have to be careful is there's this other little wrinkle in the vertical direction. They aren't. This only applies in the vertical direction, but there's this magic thing called the collapse. And so what happens according to the collapse, if my heading 1 here has a margin bottom of, let's just keep it simple, I'll use point sizes, even though I normally use rems, but let's say I have a bottom value there of 12 point. And I realize the sizing doesn't really match, but that's just as an example. And this paragraph 1 has a top margin of 3 point. And it's late. And you have a deadline tomorrow. And you're trying to get more white space between this heading 1 and this paragraph. A beginner would think it should be 15 points of space between them. It's not. The collapse means that whichever of these two values is larger, it wins. So the 3 just gets ignored. Now, if you don't understand this, what will drive you crazy is you're trying to increase this space. So you change it from 3 points to 6 points, and nothing happens. And then you change it to 9 points, and nothing happens. And right about now, you're starting to scream at Flare, you stupid piece of software, I want my money. It's not a Flare thing. It's because in that vertical direction, the way CSS was written, we have that collapse. Until this value is larger than 12, it will have 0 impact. So that's one thing to be careful of. You have to watch out for that vertical direction. All right, mediums I already covered, so apologies, I got that out of order. All right, now putting it all together, here's where I really wanted to get to. I do a lot of webinars on CSS techniques for technical writers. But one of the things that people throw rocks at me for is I tend to be very theory heavy, but I never really show the actual development process. I don't know if this will internationalize correctly, but there's a saying in the United States, nobody wants to see how the sausage is made. Well, guess what we're going to do? We are going to make some sausage. So how do we put this all together? How do we iteratively create a new style? Well, our ultimate goal, I want to be able to apply a style to text so that it looks like this little screen capture that I've just put on my shared monitor. I want it to have bold in the front, danger, colon. I want to have this outline, this border. I want to have this nice little exclamation point graphic at the beginning. This is what we want it to look like. But what am I starting with in Flare? I type a paragraph. Do not touch rotating machinery. How do I get from this to this? How do I get from that simple text to that upper screenshot? Well, I'm going to warn you right now, a lot of people think that somebody who really knows CSS, they just sit down at the editor, they click a couple of buttons, and it magically looks like that top example. Oh, how I wish it worked that way. It doesn't. It's a tedious, unfun, and not a very pretty process. The key thing to remember, though, as long as you don't expect instant success, as long as we keep inching toward the goal, every time we add a new property, it's not there yet, but it's closer. That's how developing CSS works. So the first thing that I'm going to need is something called a class. If I just make, the P style look like that top screenshot, then every paragraph will look like that. And I only want certain paragraphs to look like that. So the first thing we need to do is go into the Flare editor and create a style class. So it will be P dot danger. Now, my project already has that style. So when I demonstrate, I'm going to be creating P dot danger too, but it will be the exact same thing. So with that in mind, I'm going to go back into Flare. I've got my style sheet editor open. Now, right now, this is the advanced view. If you're not ready for the advanced view, don't panic. I'm going to switch from the advanced view to the simplified view for the rest of this demonstration. Now, if you didn't know that Flare has two different CSS editors, the idea behind that, the simplified view that I have on screen now, this is for people who may not have learned all of the details of CSS, all the naming conventions. This will kind of put some training wheels on it. Whereas the people who do know CSS, this interface will drive them crazy. Hence, we have the advanced interface. But to create a new style in this simplified view, there's a button on the toolbar labeled Add Selector. I'm going to click Add Selector. And then it's going to come up and say, what type of element are we trying to control? And I don't want a heading 1, so I'm going to use that little drop-down arrow. I'm going to scroll down and find the letter P or paragraph. I'm going to make this a paragraph type of style. Now that I've chosen P for paragraph, I have to give it a name. And I'm just going to call it Danger. Actually, I think I'm going to do Danger 5. I'm not sure how many times I've practiced this before. 5 should be safe. And I'll click OK. So now Flare is writing to my style sheet a brand new instance of paragraph styles, and it's named Danger 5. So if I scroll down, okay, there it is, P dot Danger 5. Now, before I go any further, I want to make sure that my medium is set to default. I mentioned in the advanced editor that I could do those multiple columns, and I could do, okay, here's default, here's print, here's text. You can still do that in this simplified editor, but you can only do one at a time. So if I'm on medium default, this is really my web values. If I want to come back and do a different look and feel for Danger 5, I would then come back, choose print or choose tablet, and then I could override my initial values. All right, but I'm going to stay on medium default. And so far, that's all we needed to do. So we've got this new class. All right, what's the next thing we want to do? Let's start seeing if we can get this little triangle graphic involved. So now, what I'm going to show in the slides, this is what Flare is going to write to the style sheet behind the scenes. So I'm actually going to add this background image property, and I'm going to point to the graphic that we want. Now, some of this you're going to have to push the I believe button a little bit. There's some details on using graphics as style properties. I'm not going to explain all the different options, but we have some positioning that we have to set. Background position X, that's positioning it horizontally, and we're positioning it in reference to that invisible box. Remember that box model? Well, I'm going to set that to 0. I want it hard left up against the invisible box. Background position Y, I want my little triangle centered vertically. That's the Y. And the one that may not make any sense, there's this property called background repeat, and I need to set that to no repeat. If I didn't do that, it would just repeat a million times until it ran out of space. That's the default behavior if you don't set a background repeat value. I see a question, why didn't I just do a generic class? I'm really gearing this more towards beginners, and I don't want them to run with scissors. There are many ways this could have been done, but doing it as a class of paragraph, while that might not be the most powerful technique, it's definitely one of the safest. All right, so these are the values we want to get Flare to apply. Let's go into the editor and actually do it. Ooh, and I need to pick up the pace here. We're running out of time. All right, so back into the Flare editor. I'm going to double click my p.danger5 style. That will bring up the properties dialog. If I go to the background tab, there's a place for background image. I'll click the little browse button. This will let me navigate out to my project. Here's that little caution graphic that I want. With that selected, I can click OK. And remember, I told you there's that repeat option. Well, look what happens if you don't set it to no repeat. So here where it says repeat default, we're going to change that to no repeat. Right now, the graphic only appears once. Now we get to those X and Y values. On the X value, I know in the slide it said 0, but I'm just going to put in left. That will work just as fine. And then the vertical, the Y, I want to choose center. So that is taking care of everything on that slide. Now you're not seeing it here in this little preview because it's multiple lines. But remember when I said, no one wants to see those sausages made. The problem, if I were to go to apply this style right now, I would not get what I expected. What I would get is this. The image is there, but it's behind the text, and it's chopped off top and bottom. So this is a screenshot of the Flare editor. Again, I'm just trying to save a few minutes. If we had a few more minutes, I would actually go apply that stuff. But here's a screenshot of exactly what happens. And here's where a lot of beginners get discouraged. Don't get discouraged. This is progress. 2 minutes ago, we had no graphic. Now we have the correct graphic, and it's in the correct position. That's progress. Now it's chopped off. It's behind the text, and I don't want that, so we still have more work to do. But that's progress. All right, so what are we going to do next? Well, let's make room for that image. I don't want it stuck behind that text, and I don't want it to get chopped off top and bottom. So here are all of the style properties. We've already had flare right to the style sheet. We're going to add line height 40px. 40. I happen to know that that triangle graphic is exactly 40 pixels tall. And I want to make room for that. So even though the text isn't that high, I want it to have some additional white space top and bottom. So that's going to keep it from being chopped off. Then I want to go set my padding left. Now, again, if you remember padding, I've got that invisible box. And right now, my text is right up against the invisible box. What padding left is going to do is move the text 70 pixels. So now my text is over here, but that has no impact on my triangle graphic. The triangle graphic is controlled here. So now my triangle will be here, and that padding just moved the text to give me room. So that's cool. And then the last thing I want to do, because I've bumped up that line height so much, I'm worried this graphic is going to dwarf my text now. So we're going to bump up the font size a little bit to 1.3 M units. All right, so those are the next three adjustments we want to make. I'm going to put the PowerPoint away. I'm going to pull Flare back up. I'm going to double click and open P.Danger5 again in the Flare style sheet editor. Now, some of this is just experience and getting familiar with the interface, but where can I adjust line height? It's on the Paragraph tab. So on the Paragraph tab, I'll go to line height. I'm going to set a length, and I'm just going to manually type in 40 with a unit of pixels, px. Right, then I'm going to want some padding. Now, padding is actually on borders. Since it's kind of part of that box model where it's defined by borders, it just seemed like a good place to put it. Now I can also set padding left, right, top, and bottom. So I can set all four sides between the text and the invisible box. But what we really care about this time is padding left. I just want that left indent to be a bit more, so I have room for my graphic. So under padding left, I'm going to put in 70. And from the drop down for units, I'm just going to choose pixels. And now the final adjustment is that font size. I want that text a little bit bigger so it's not dwarfed by that graphic. We'll go to the font tab. And here's where it trips people out. I want 1.3 M units, or 130% if you prefer percentages. And they use the little drop down. All they see is point sizes. Well, you don't have to choose from a pick list. I'll just highlight where it says default and I'll type 1.3 EM, 1.3 M units. And then click OK. So it's still not going to be beautiful, but we're way closer. Now, again, I know some people got mad that I jumped right back to the PowerPoint. Again, we only have a couple of minutes left. I want to make sure we don't run out of time. If I were to go to my topic and apply this style right now in its current condition, it would look like, and now I'm switching to PowerPoint, this little screenshot at the bottom. So just by adding 3 more properties, we got a lot closer to the goal here. So those first 4 properties, that got the correct graphic on the image, but now we're controlling the text behavior and we've moved it over. All right, this is looking a lot better. What do we have left to do here? Well, it doesn't say danger : in front of it yet, and it doesn't have the border, the outline that we want. So we still aren't done yet, but we're iterating forward. We're slowly creeping up on the goal. All right, so how do we add that border now? Well, again, here's all of the properties that Flare has already written to the style sheet for us. Now we're going to go same place we did the padding adjustment, that border tab, but this time we're going to set, believe it or not, 3 different attributes. Border style will set to solid. Border width will set to 1 pixel. And border color we will set to black. And when you do this, remember that invisible box? We're making the invisible box visible. Now, what's cool is I just set this 3 times in Flare. I set solid, I set 1 pixel, I set black. But what Flare actually writes to the style sheet behind the scenes is this monstrosity. Flare is going to set it for the left side, the right side, the top, and the bottom auto-magically. All right, so I want to set all these border values now. So let's pull Flare back up. I'm going to double click and reopen Danger 5 again. Go back to the Borders tab. And here where it says Borders, I can set left, right, top, and bottom individually if I was so inclined. But notice there's this little drop down to the right of those 4 fields. I can set all 4 simultaneously by using that drop down. I'm going to set a value of 1 px, 1 pixel, solid, and that top right corner, that drop down lets me choose my color. And no, I don't want red, I want black. And click OK. By setting that one little group drop down, you can see that Flare just updated all 4 values, left, right, top, and bottom for me. And I can see the black outline in the preview. Again, at this point, if I were to click OK, go to the topic, apply this, it's going to look a whole lot better, but it's still not perfect. Again, I'll just pull up a screenshot of what that looks like right now. We're getting closer. The 2 things I have left to do, how do I get that danger : text in front of my typed text auto-magically? And I don't like those sharp, pointy corners. How do we round off those corners? I see a note in the chat window, Flare doesn't support shorthand entry. Actually, it does. If you're smart enough to put it in, it will respect it. I'm just doing things kind of the longhand method for people who may not be ready for shorthand. In fact, as long as we're talking, for some of you really salty types, there is something neat that we do in the Flare CSS editor. I don't think it's in there right now, but if you're in the advanced mode and you try to use one of the brand new cutting edge CSS properties like flex, you won't see it in the Flare editor. However, if you're smart enough to go into the code view of the style sheet and add a flex property manually just one time, then when you go back to the advanced editor, oh, now you have access to the flex properties. It's a cheeky thing that we do. And this was a long time of discussions and development. We only expose in the CSS Advanced Editor the properties that we know work in 95% of modern browsers. If there's something that only works in, say, 80% of known browsers, we still build support for it into the editor. We just don't automatically populate it in the list of available properties. And we figure if you're smart enough to add that property by hand one time, then we'll unlock it and you can now see it in the CSS editor. All right, so that was a bit of a sidebar there. All right, how do we do these last two things? How do I get that danger and those rounded corners? These are actually pretty easy. So here are all of the CSS lines that Flare has written to our style sheet. We're now going to add one that MadCap invented. Anytime you see that MC hyphen in front of a CSS property, well, that means that we are actually augmenting the native CSS capabilities. We're letting CSS do things it was never designed to do. Now, in my case, I'm actually cheating. There is an auto number format capability in Flare. This is really designed so that styles like figure caption can automatically increment your figure captions in a PDF. You know, figure 3-1, the next one, figure 3-2, and so on. But I can actually cheat, and rather than doing numbering, I can just use that to inject any text string I want in the beginning of my content. I see your note, Craig. Before can do that. But the before property didn't exist 8 years ago when we developed this technique. So touche. Sometimes it's nice when the W3C actually follows us. It's pretty cool. All right, so that's a technique I'm going to use to put that danger text in there. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to go back to that border tab. And once again, there's a border radius value. We only have to put it in once, but then Flare will replicate that for all 4 corners. Once we've done all of that and we apply it to text, then we're going to get our ultimate goal. So let's wrap this up and finish it off. Let's go back into the Flare editor. I'm still on the border tab. So let's go ahead and take care of that corner radius first. There's this border radius section. I'll use that little drop down. I want to set all 4 at once. And I'm going to set this to 5 px, 5 pixels of corner radius. It's a little subtle. Now, you can do a secondary. Now, if you want it just to be a continuous radius, you only have to set 1. But if you want the corners to be kind of oval, well, I could set 5 pixels on the left, and I could do 10 pixels on the right. And that's way too subtle. Let's get crazy with that. Let's do 40 over here and 10 over here. Well, it's not a great preview, but to hopefully get the idea, you can actually ovalize the shape if you need to. Now, normally I wouldn't do that, I'm going to end up making these both 10 just for giggles, even though that's not exactly what my slide showed. With both of those values the same, you see you get a nice rounded corner. Once that is set, I'll click OK. Oh, wait, no, not quite yet. Let's go to auto number. I want to show all of my commands. I'll start with a bold command. Danger colon space. And I'll close the bold command. All right, that's the last thing I'm going to do. Click OK. And now the most important thing, before you go to the topic, do a save all. If you forget to save, then when you apply the style, nothing will happen. So now if I go to a topic, here is my text, do not touch rotating machinery. I'll put my cursor somewhere in that text. I'll scroll down. P.danger 5. And it's not perfect. I'd have to go through and do some fine tuning. It looks like I need to make that line height a little bit larger, but you get the idea. But the nice thing is once you iron this out, let me take that off. If I pre-apply my official one, this one even has the yellow background color. So a lot of cool things. Once you create a style like this, and I admit, it's not a pretty process, but you only have to do it once. From this point forward, I can just type anything I want, oops, do not run with scissors. And I can just start apply that stuff. And now I get a very consistent look and feel. So don't be afraid of creating styles. Hopefully this has pulled away the curtain. It's not a pretty process. It's never a pretty process. Anybody who tells you it is, they're being cheeky with you. It's just as long as you're inching forward and you're making progress to the goal, then you are awesome. All right, so with that, I think it's about time for our final break, and then we're going to finish up.
Actually, we're not going to take a break. We're going to
we're going to go straight in.
Yeah, straight into Q&A. So thank you, Mike. That was fantastic.